Hello, welcome to Art Matters. These are designed as a series of short talks on art, the first of which will focus on the painting Olympia by Edward Manet. Okay, so Manet's painting of Olympia was completed in 1863 when it went on display at the exhibition in Paris organised by the Salon. It's important before we sort of do anything else that we understand a little bit about how the art world operated at the time, and also about some of the things going on in terms of just the society that surrounded the art world as well. So Paris in the middle of the 19th century was very much the centre of the art world. Art was kind of controlled by an establishment group of artists called or referred to as the Salon. They would choose and select artists whose work they felt was suitable for display in a form of hierarchy in terms of its importance. And that hierarchy existed in the form of paintings of historical subject matter, mostly classical or biblical scenes would be considered the most important, followed behind by portraiture of politicians, important people within the clergy and so forth. Beneath that was landscape painting. Beneath that, what was called or loosely called genre painting, so painting of the everyday, of sort of events and so forth, things that were happening. And then at the bottom was still life painting. So this sort of hierarchy existed in terms of the importance placed on artwork. Much of that was down to, I think, the way art was commissioned. So historical paintings, those with a biblical and classical nature, they would be commissioned quite often by the church. Artists would produce work in response to requests from the church, and as a result of that, they became regarded as the most important type of work. We're also in the middle of the 19th century in this sort of transition period, moving towards, or the start of the Industrial Revolution. So the world is beginning to change, and artists, like anyone else, are beginning to embrace those changes and are growing interested in what the future offers them, maybe looking at the past, wanting to move away from those traditions, those things that have been as they were for many years. And this painting really sort of typifies that. It is a painting that is sort of initially certainly on first appearance, we look upon it and we think it's realistic, part of the movement realism that existed at the time. But actually on closer inspection, it's perhaps not as technically skilled as we might first imagine. So Manet, as an artist, finds himself in quite a fortunate position. He comes from a middle class, quite a wealthy family. He can paint really for the sake of just wanting to paint. He's not requiring money in the way that other artists were. And because of that, he's able to perhaps challenge the establishment with the type of work he wants to do. That allows him, therefore, to not follow those traditions of painting to a technically high standard, and indeed not, as we'll see in a moment, not following the traditional subject matter that was expected at the time. And when this painting went on display and was seen by the public, most of whom were male, they viewed it in a way that was very critical. It was considered quite outrageous. It challenged all the perceived norms at the time. So what are we looking at? Well, it's fairly clear that obviously we are situated probably close to, almost sort of in the room where there is a young woman lying naked on a bed. Just behind her is a maidservant with a bouquet of flowers that's being presented to her. And if we look at the right-hand side, just below her feet, there is a black cat that is standing on its haunches. There's not much in the background other than some quite exotic drapes, so we're not entirely sure where we are. But what we can say is that we're actually sort of in the room with this young woman. And on first impression, we might assume, because there is a maidservant there, we might assume that this is a woman who's quite wealthy, perhaps somebody from a wealthy family or somebody who is quite important. But that actually couldn't be further from the truth. And it's because of that, partly, that this was a painting that was considered so outrageous. Because what Manet has painted here is a painting of a prostitute. And we can see from the stance that she holds, she looks directly into the gaze of the viewer. She's not ashamed of her nakedness, quite the reverse in actual fact. We're made to feel that really she is the person that is in the position of power. That's emphasised, I think, not just by her gaze, but also by the gaze of the cat. And if we actually kind of just imagine ourselves in the position of the viewer, we are really, almost in the room. So she's looking at us and perhaps challenging us. Why are you looking at me? Why are you here? The flowers are a gift from a client. Maybe Manet is suggesting that actually the way we look at this woman, we are the client and she holds the power. So one of the other things that we can also say from this painting that was considered really not expected at the time was the style in which it was painted. So I mentioned earlier that realism was the movement associated with the early part of the 19th century. A technical level that was expected was of great skill. And yet this painting, Manet's brushstrokes are looser, the skin tones are not as accurate, there is a black outline visible around parts of her body, and just the overall impression is one of a certain amount of naivety. And so, putting all that together, what Manet has done in the face of what was the accepted standard and norms and expectations of the establishment is he's taken a young prostitute, a young female, but he's painted her in the classical style of a history painting. So someone from the lowest or lower social classes, but depicted in a style that was more associated with work that was considered the most morally acceptable. So the other thing to note about this, and the other thing that again caused outrage, was that Manet, in painting this, was actually referencing a work that had been completed far earlier by one of the Renaissance artists. And the next slide will show you what that is. So here we are, okay? We're now looking at the reference that Manet made to an earlier work, one painted in the 16th century, the mid-1500s, by the Italian Renaissance artist Titian. And here we can see realism in its glory, where the woman who is reclining on the bed, the skin tones, the proportions are absolutely perfect. There's almost a sort of a super real quality about it. Another thing worth mentioning is that at the base of the bed on the right, we can see a dog, but this time the dog is recumbent, lying docile, calm. The relationship between a dog and its master is one that is very different from that of a cat and its owner. The dog is considered to be the servant, really. It sort of is obedient to its master, where a cat, the cat that appears on Manet's painting, a cat is symbolic of something that has its own free will, that will do what it wishes rather than obey the commands of anyone else. So there we are. Painting by Manet, mid-19th century, that suggests perhaps a change in how art at the time is being viewed and where art was moving to. Within sort of 10, 15, 20 years, the Impressionist movement had begun. Manet was a part of the early stages of that. But you can just see that transition from the old moving to the new art, and those challenges that were being put into place, just those initial steps away from what was perceived as being the correct way to make art, and moving to what became a new art in a very short period after that. Thanks for listening.